Hey, this is Greg, and I'm here with Tanya for another episode of Ask
Mom
and Dad. And we're getting better at saying this, so it almost sounds like we're one voice, which is always a challenge in any married life to become one.
Okay, that's
and we are kind of one-ish.
Information, and we are whatever God says we are, whether we feel it or do
we are
it well all the time.
stuck with whatever God said. Well, that's
not what I meant.
We're going to talk about some stuff. It's been interesting. We've been on the road for our son's show last week and the week before. It was a lot of fun. He played the villain in the infamous violent show called Beauty and the Beast. Yeah, that's it. He played Gaston in the musical violent comedy. Well, his role was kind of, the best part of it was a little boy afterwards talking to him, and I heard just in time to hear him telling a little 4-year-old boy, no, son, you don't want to be like me. My character's the bad guy in the show. And that was just absolutely funny to me that the boys in the crowd were still kind of like, yeah, Gaston's my man. And it was a good time watching them do that, and all the little girls coming in their bell outfits and all the fun stuff there, lining up to see that. That's probably the best and most fullest, the packed out house for shows that we've ever been to for that. But it was
a lot of people wanted to go see it, I guess, because they've also seen it on Broadway, or the Broadway version of it, which I thought was interesting because I don't guess I'm familiar with that. So that was kind of neat because we even brought some friends with us who had seen it on Broadway. I forgot where. I don't think
the stage version of it, the tour version of it.
So that was interesting, and I think these kids at College of the Ozarks had a great time, and they did a really fantastic job. All of them, just superb, great vocals on all sides, and good acting, good choreography. They just really did a great job. Great costumes too.
Yeah, I think so. I was really taken by it. I think the thing that struck me was, like I said, my son telling this child, no, I'm not the good guy. But the thing about Gaston, the character, is he's a villain, but he thinks he's the hero. And I think that's what makes him appealing.
He thinks he's all that she needs. Yeah, that's kind of a little bit arrogant.
And to the point of, I think, what we're going to talk a little bit about today is we are living in a world where oftentimes villains think they're heroes.
Oh, yes.
And
this is true.
With seeing our son at 8-hour clip away from us on the road, that means lots of time to catch up on news and podcasts and stories. And so I've been wanting to talk a little bit about some subject matter of late as we move into a political season. Did I say move in? We've been in a political season, I think, since as long as America's been around. But, it seems like every 2 years, 3 years, every day somebody's talking about politics.
But did we really take a break since like the beginning of President Trump's presidency, 8 years ago or so?
No.
I'm pretty sure we've never gotten a break because all through these last 8 years, it's a constant question of what's real, what's true, who is telling the truth, and who's going to get caught in it. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, and I think that I was struck, and you just said something, so now I want to look up in a scripture verse real quick and read it. And I shouldn't have to read it because I know it by heart. One of the things that's really frustrating
is that if you see both sides of all the different stories, which I pray that people do, I pray they look for information from, quote, both sides. One, the Bible says you believe one side when you hear it until you hear the other side. And the problem is we are called to make wise decisions, and that means we need to see the different angles, because I think once you do, you don't automatically just buy into what they tell you in the media or on the, whatever. New York Times used to be somewhat lauded as some sort of great information, but I think people need to be questioning everything they're hearing, everything they're seeing, and I hope that's what they're doing, and especially when it comes to our government, our politics. As of late, what did you look up?
A couple of things came to mind, and the reason I'm saying this is so oftentimes there's two passages in Scripture, and this goes right to our political discourse. In Genesis 1, we have the accounting of the creation of the world. It says, "And God spoke, and it was." And then in John 1, we have in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, Logos being the Word. And in both cases, we're finding something that has to do with speaking something, and therefore it's reality. And we live in a world we live in a culture that understands that the person who controls the dialogue, controls the conversation, finds themselves in the place of ruling. I've said
even the definitions you said the other day.
Well, and the Bible also says in Proverbs 15 that a gentle answer turns away wrath. In other words, someone who knows how to control themselves in the course of a difficult conversation may very well be the one that wins the day. So when you've got people who are who know what they're trying to say and direct the conversation or divert the conversation in a direction that they want it to go, they're ultimately going to be in control of how the public or the people around them see what's happening.
Interesting take on that verse, but okay, yeah. I mean, that's true. When people can handle themselves, I would call that cunning, sometimes deceptive, coercion, manipulation at times.
It is.
So I don't know if I would see it in the context of that verse, but I understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah, the understanding of that verse is the person who doesn't lose their temper doesn't lose the battle. The person who loses their temper loses the battle. And so, even if someone is actually amping up the volume and acting like they're a lot more, if they're in control, they can drive someone to madness or they can drive someone to calmness. It's the power of language.
Yeah.
And so what we're running into in today's society, when I was listening to some stuff online, I was listening to Tucker Carlson the other day, and he made the comment about that some are running against Christianity in our culture. But you can't call it that, because if you call it running against Christianity, you'll lose 31% of your voting block, because especially evangelical or conservative Christians
there are
like
some
we
who
are
actually care.
actually the most powerful voting block in the country. And so they have to find a way to divide, because one group of people, 31% of Americans, that's a third, right? A clear third of Americans consider themselves Christians and identify the Bible as a foundational book for life and how we should live our lives. And so the only way to do that is to fracture that group if you want to try to control them. And so what they do is they change the language. And so instead of calling it Christians or even evangelicals, which evangelicals were demonized for a while as a special brand of Christian that was problematic, but that 31% is largely evangelical. Excuse me, they brought this new term in that even evangelicals don't understand. I was at lunch the other week with their pastor, and he says he couldn't stand this whole idea of Christian nationalism. That's the term that he said. And I found myself pausing and remembering that a gentle answer turns away a wrathful conversation. I said, can you define for me what you mean when you say Christian nationalism? Because it occurred to me at that moment in the conversation that we may not understand. I'm always about this. I don't think we're speaking the same language. I'm in the South now, as in the Northwest, a couple of years ago, and they're very different. Same English words, different meanings.
Yeah, that's right. That's true.
And so
it's weird.
Well, heck, when Adobe products can sell themselves as Adobe Evangelist, and that's their tech team, it's like, that's a different understanding of evangelist. We believe in our product is what they're trying to say. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, although that's just a marketing version for them, still it's the same thing, using language. So this fellow described Christian nationalism to me wrongly. His definition of Christian nationalism was really what would be called as American or Christian Zionism, believing that their American is another tribe of Judah. This is the definition I was given. America is another tribe of Israel, and therefore is God's anointed, and so it should reflect that. And I thought my response actually to him was, you believe that's a large group of the American Christian right population? And he said, well, there's definitely people out there that believe that. And I said, is that what you think that is being put out in the ether today? And that's what the Trump side or the Republican side of the aisle is saying. And he believed that to be so. He called himself a political refugee as a result.
As replacing God's chosen, or are we talking about a little bit like Mormon thinking that we're another
Mormon.
Tribe?
It sounds a lot more like, Mormon
included.
Mormon in that another tribal sense, but not Mormon in the can become God sense.
Okay.
But that we're God's chosen people now. And
that was the first thing I said. That feels like two different things. If we're the chosen, we're replacing the original chosen people of God. Is that what we're saying? Is it because that type of thought pattern?
Some
is
would
what
believe
Hitler
that. I think you would find all of these. This is all of the above.
Popularized, didn't he? He popularized that thinking that we are the Christians, quote unquote, which of that loosely defined, because he wouldn't have been to me in that definition, but
Right.
he was trying to convince people that the Jews were fine. We could condemn them because they were no longer, because they did not follow Christ. They were
the haters of Christ. They were the killers of Christ. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and then Christians are the new, set aside, or the new. Anyway, that's dangerous thinking.
Indeed.
Correct.
Yeah, so I agree. That is exactly that. It's just something that
Which is
here's the
not
thing.
actually what we would what we would term, right? That's not the definition you're looking at.
No,
with
I think,
Christian
but
nationalism.
with everything you're saying about definitions, here's I think the key point: those who would seek to control us would be more interesting in confusing us rather than clarifying things to us. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
In other words, if I can throw out a new term like Christian nationalism, and there's 300 different definitions of it, and it doesn't get resolved between now and the election, I can now manipulate that term however I want to be manipulated. And all I need to do is give you the sense that somehow it's a threat or bad.
That's like this whole illegal. We can't call the people literally crossing our borders in against our laws. They're going against our laws, which is the term illegal. If you're doing something against the law, you're doing it illegal. But we can't somehow to deem that. We saw an article that a teenager in Massachusetts or something like that was suspended from school because they wrote a paper
And they called him an illegal alien?
Yeah, referred to literally immigrant.
Right, there's creating a
population is
dialogue to
illegal.
say that certain things are acceptable and certain things, and that's the whole idea of changing the speaking thing. But
Yeah,
on my
literally
point,
the same idea.
listen to this MSNBC commentator comment on the difference between Christians and Christian nationalists, and tell me what your thoughts are on that.
And the one thing that unites all of them, because there's many different groups orbiting Trump, but the thing that unites them as Christian nationalists, not Christians, by the way, because Christian nationalists is very different, is that they believe that our rights as Americans, as all human beings, don't come from any earthly authority. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They come from God.
So there you have someone who's saying that Christians are not Christian nationalists, and then defining Christianity or what we believe about our rights as coming from God and not from
Okay, they define that as Christian
government.
nationalists,
Right, that's
not
what they're
as
defining.
Christians.
But
So
you and
that's
I would
weird.
say, then that makes us Christian nationalists.
Well, also, how did she separate that out? What is a Christian then?
A Christian.
Really?
She didn't make the definition of a Christian.
Really, a
yeah.
Christian is whoever sits around, calls themselves a Christian, and then worships the government or bows to them first, because that's kind of
Right.
what she's
The whole
saying.
idea here is that it's the same thing that happened, and truthfully, in Samuel,
Europe
when
or-
they wanted a king. They wanted something like everyone else had. They wanted to put
Yeah.
their authority in behind something that was tangible and not intangible. And Christians have been taught that God is their ultimate authority, and that is the foundation for all moral and legal and governmental structures that we exist in our world, right? And so she's saying that that's Christian nationalism. So she's basically saying, well, it's not Christian. Christian nationalism is what, if I were to say it the way I hear it, Christians are not this, but Christian nationalists are Christians. That's what I hear her saying.
Yeah, that's weird.
Because I
that's-
don't know a Christian that doesn't believe we get our authority from God.
However, the comparison made a whole lot of sense to me, why that's a bad thing, even why we need to make sure this differentiation. Because in Roman times, Caesar was God first, and the Christians who chose to live under God's authority and then obey Caesar, kind of in the sense of, like Paul said, to honor the governing authorities, that was still bad because they did not honor them as God. They just honored them as under the authority of God. So that's what apparently that's the threat.
Yeah, well, the Roman thing that you could add more things to it, but you couldn't have one thing that you couldn't have an authority over Rome. That's what you were getting at, right?
Well, I said they had to view Caesar as God. They could be Christians, quote, and be nice
Right,
and whatever
as the
under
ultimate
that. But
authority,
if they
yeah.
didn't see him as the ultimate, whereas we would say we are under our God's authority, but our government is also under that authority, so we can be obedient to government. So that's why I'm saying that's why it must be a threat to them.
Right. It's a threat to power. The question is, who has power? Does Caesar have power, or is there something above Caesar? Caesar? I just made up a word, Caesar. Or is there something above
It's fun
Caesar?
to make up words.
Yes, something above Caesar that has power. And as we hold as Christians that there is no one above God. You shall have no other God before me is the first commandment. And so here's the problem that we have with our government right now. That lady just said in that clip that Christians believe in the first commandment. No, she said Christian nationalists believe in the first commandment.
Again, like we said.
So what is a Christian?
Yeah.
A Christian is she doesn't even know what a Christian is because her definition was not even on par. It was way off. It was foolishness.
Back to one other conversation we've had about the definition these days of Christian. People do not even associate it with followers of Jesus. They associate it with some sort of kind goodness out there that is, however they have framed it in their mind, whatever they consider good. They would even call themselves that. But don't ask them about Jesus or who they follow because that's not going to be involved in it. So the word Christian no longer means follower of Christ, at least in this
which
kind
is
of definition.
interesting. Yeah, because I mean, so they would take if you take your point there and you say that Christians doesn't mean follower of Christ. Well, Christ wasn't interested in Rome. He didn't spend a lot of time talking about Rome, right? As a matter of fact, they look at the writings of Paul and say Paul says submit to your government authority because God gave you that. But interesting that Paul actually says because there's a higher authority that gave you some authorities to submit to. So any cursory reading of the New Testament and of Jesus's interactions with people, Jesus interacted and he didn't make Rome his priority because he didn't need to because Rome was inconsequential because Jesus's kingdom is greater than Rome, and he just looks at Rome as like, you're just a blip on a map. You're coming and going. The people that I have unto myself that I'm here ministering to right now, that I'm calling unto myself, have been around longer than Rome. Israel pre-existed Rome. It pre-exists Babylon. It goes all the way back to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And so God owns all things, all peoples, and all kingdoms come subject unto him ultimately. Well, and that is a threat to our American culture. Unfortunately, what's happened in our American government is there is a group of people currently in power in our government that do not want to submit themselves to a higher authority.
Well, that's what I was going to say. This pastor you were listening to interviewing,
Doug Wilson.
Tucker was interviewing, was saying that is the issue. The problem with this attitude is that they want to set themselves up as God, so therefore the rules they make, the things they have deemed, especially in our culture, as, you don't need to be free to do that. We can make that decision for you because we know best. Those are they're setting that up to be what runs our country, and then us as Christians needing to make our own decisions. In fact, that was another interview you were listening to, right? A lady who has recently been converted from she was a liberal media journalist or something like that, and was converted.
She's a feminist author and promoter of women's rights, and actually pointed out that during the pandemic, women lost more ground than they gained in the entire 30 years because of what happened in the pandemic.
Okay, I don't remember that part you telling me, but I remember you saying that she pointed out that the Christians were the ones that got to the bottom line of a lot of the lies that were spoken during COVID because of
faith.
Being able to trust and believe that God would direct us on our own and give us we have freedom, which is what our country was built on. We believe that our country was built on these inalienable rights that God has given us, not that government. In fact, that's the whole point of our entire government structure, was England was putting itself up to be a godlike entity that also made decisions, and then calling their kings the divine right of kings or whatever, saying that God had given them that right. So that's the whole point of this government we have currently, is that our founding fathers knew that would be a threat, that the government would begin to say, well, we can even decide for the churches what they should decide or believe or whatever, because we are ultimate, I guess, or whatever.
Well, it's a coin of phrase I heard recently. It's a tale as old as time. It's who is the boss? Is mankind thinking its own way versus having authority above themselves? Now, I was looking at a book that was that set the hypothesis that the Constitution of the United States is not written with any Christian influence. It's written primarily from a secular viewpoint. That the greatest influence on America and its Constitution is the Enlightenment. And so I have this conversation, and I begin to have to investigate this a little bit, and the back and forth that I come up with is that the author believes that Enlightenment thinking influenced the entire writing because the founders wanted to keep a godless constitution, and what he means by godless, in his defense, is that it's not centric around God as the entity. It wanted to keep God out so Americans could be free to believe and do whatever they wanted to. And my position
not to
is
set up a religious authority as a specific religion like England, right? I understand what he thinks he's getting at. The problem is, if you are a follower of Christ, it influences every way you think, everything you do, because God has set up a wisdom that is greater than men, and we believe in His influence in us will live through us. So all of that, you can't separate that out and say, over here, we're going to be enlightened and we're going to have all these cool rules and yeah, Christianity's cool. Now over here, let's, worship. But because it's going to be too intertwined, there's no way that the founding fathers meant to separate it out so exactly. They meant so that Christians could worship the way we believe we ought to, as well as live our lives civilly with other people. And that being the whole foundational structure that gives us the freedoms, the interaction, the power to be free in a safe setting, because God is a higher power, a higher understanding of truth and wisdom, and of relating to people. Anyway, humans can't even do it that way.
I think that what's happening is there's a belief structure. If someone is obsessed with power, then they're worshiping power. And as we were just heard a little bit ago, that you tend to reflect what you worship. And so if you worship power, not only are you going to believe that power is your God in this case, you're going to believe that whoever opposes you just wants what you want as well.
Oh, yeah.
And so when they say a Christian, they're going to say, well, a Christian wants power. But the reality is what you just outlined was not someone who wants power, but someone who wants to give liberty, to give away power. And what God has said to us as believers is, I'm in a relationship with you, a partnership with you. God is the ultimate authority, but His desire is to walk with us to manage His world.
Problem.
And He allows us liberty and freedom to act in a way that is in concert with Him, not in I'm the boss. When I start to say I'm the boss, then I'm elevating myself above God, and I'm not acting as God. I'm acting as what the people over there that are afraid of it are saying.
That's the whole problem. They do not know the God, the one true God.
And this goes back to
Jesus, who came to represent Him, who literally laid His life down, not demanded power.
Right.
And when the God of the universe loved His people and stretched His arm out, and through Abraham made covenants of His own, toward swearing by His own name, not by any other name, because He's the one that the covenant was made so that He would have to keep it, not anyone else. And He offered it to humanity who He loves. And then ultimately gave Jesus so that we could be reconciled completely to Him because our sin stood in our way. They don't know Him. They don't know that that's the purest, the ultimate form of freedom is to be handed something because someone loved you so much. And you to be the humble one who says, in gratefulness, you are God, you are Lord, you're Master, and you may tell me what will bring honor to you. That's so sad to me. It's just so sad that they raise themselves up against the pagan-style gods who demand and, sacrifice to me so that I will gain power over you and whatever. That's all they can think of when they think of the idea of a supreme being. Well,
and their gods that they're worshiping are gods that are akin to what was in the Old Testament. I think Molech was power, Ashtoreth was inappropriate sexual worship, those kinds of things. I'm trying to think of another one, but they're becoming like these gods that are created by men that don't allow for people to thrive as God desires for them to. But to back to my original premise, the point now is if you want to have power, you have to control something, and they don't have to completely give a clear. It's in their best interest not to give a clear definition, but to confuse the definition. Most of the time, when it comes to me as a pastor talking to people about Jesus, or as a Christian talking to someone about Jesus, we spend more time in a conversation clarifying misbeliefs or what's the word I'm looking for, confusion that people have about who Jesus really is. And so, and here's a good example. This entire conversation is rooted around the fact that someone's out there deliberately throwing out misinformation.
Yeah,
the ministry of misinformation, or the ministry of information, or whatever it is trying to tear down clarity around who Jesus is, around who Christians are. And that is, again, a tale as old as time. That is an ancient problem. It happened in Rome. Nero recategorized everything to burn Christians because he was the one that got things messed up, so he decided to blame it on someone else. So he redefined things and caused it to happen. And the same thing is happening now.
Or the redefining thing, that's everywhere.
Well, it's happening every day. And the thing is Christianity is a threat to anyone who want to hold power because they put more control into the masses rather than into the centralized government. And here's the thing. The argument of this writer saying a godless constitution, well, the writers of the Constitution, besides, I know this guy's reacting to people like wall builders and others who are saying, well, here's their religious faith. The idea that what these people inherently believe, that the one side versus another is not going to influence them, is crazy. I'll say, sure, the Enlightenment influenced them, but when you go through and look at the Enlightenment was influenced by Christians and rational thinkers as well. It wasn't completely a godless thing. France took it that way, and it didn't work out well for them.
Right.
America understood the blending of these things and the tension of how reason, or I would say even better yet, because here's where the people on the left or the non-Christian worldview says it, that reason, I think, solely belongs to Christians.
Yep.
Anything outside of that's unreasonable because we're not afraid to talk about things that don't make sense or not even things that aren't even Christian. We just wind up through process of reason coming back to the truth. And people who won't see the truth just won't see it because they don't want to do it. But so what they'll do is they'll confuse it by throwing up straw men and arguing against these things rather than actually being willing to have an honest conversation or dialogue around something that might bring them to reality. On a political front, they just create confusion in the language or adopt something that can drive people to be confused about such that they can get you to vote a certain way. I mean, at the end of the day, the choice isn't in America, isn't between two men. It's between value sets.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's what I've said again and again.
Well,
I don't care if you like the presidential choices or not. You're not voting for that. If there was 5 parties, you have to choose a value set. Which set of values more reflects who you are as a follower of Jesus?
And the sad thing is this has been trying to creep in forever because we've studied in homeschool circles, the Chris Klicko, when he was doing the legal work for the homeschool legal defense, was putting out there the information from the 40s even, how in order to angle, I guess, the thinking of the educators of that day, that humanistic thought patterns were to replace basically the original textbooks and such that were written, like say McGuffey's Readers and some of those that were written from biblical perspective. They were to replace them with humanistic textbooks and thinking. So all of this, and this may have been a reflective of the Enlightenment, I don't know, but the bottom line is they fought it. So even our founders worked really, really hard to get the language so that it was honoring to God and supplying Christians.
It allowed for it, yeah.
Freedom.
Yeah.
I mean, supplying Christians with the freedom under God's authority. But then for them to, even back then, begin that process of trying to indoctrinate a thought pattern of humanism, and then knowing they had to start with their kids. So they put it in as a public school edict, I don't remember, somewhere in the 40s. It's just frustrating. You were talking about that God is the one who invites us. It's, of all the how would you say it? Of all the supreme beings out there, what God of all those teachings, of all these, their weird ideas, invites them in and says, come, let's sit together and talk. Our God does, even to reason with us. In Isaiah, it actually says, come reason together. But in this translation, it says, come, let us discuss this. Though your sins are scarlet. In other words, though you can't even approach me because you're so messed up.
You're literally unseeable because you're so covered in sin.
You can't even approach me, but they will be white as snow. Though they are as red as crimson, they will be wool. If you are willing and obedient, you will eat the good things of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you'll be destroyed or devoured by the sword. In other words, come and talk to me. Let me tell you what I know and what I have to offer you. But the discuss this is even an open invitation. Come and I'll hear all your woes. I'll hear all your arguments, all your, whatever. And then I'll tell you how it is.
Right.
And maybe you'll care, first of all, because you've been invited. That's an invitation.
Yeah.
Into the God of the universe that we can't even approach because he's so holy.
Yeah.
Into his circle.
You referenced the interview I heard with Tucker Carlson and Naomi Wolf earlier. And she was like I said, she was a women's rights advocate, and she was as left-wing as they came in. And the pandemic came along, and she began to see some things that scared her. And she commented that she was a ancient literature writer. She was reading from some of the original English translations of the Bible. But she and Tucker were going...
Oh, the Geneva Bible.
The Geneva Bible,
yeah,
right.
We just
because
saw
she could
a copy
read
of
that language. We saw a copy of that recently. And she said how true it was to the closest... she actually reads Hebrew because she comes from a Jewish background.
Wow,
so she said how true it was to the Hebrew. She said compared to some of the more modern texts, which were made God sound as this angry... And I'm listening to her going... You haven't really read that many modern texts because that's not the same way I hear it. But she's new to it, so I'll cut her some slack there. But she's I think Tucker's Harvard or Yale educated. I know he's an Ivy Leaguer.
Yale, I'm almost sure.
And then she's also, and he said, yeah. He says it, and I'm watching these two people who have been in the information industry their entire life wonder, because they just started reading the Bible in their adult. Tucker's in his 50s. She probably is close to it, at least. And they're marveling about their first solid read of the scriptures and how much this book, to quote Tucker, is the center of everything. And I'm sitting here going, wow, it took you 53 years
and how it's blowing their minds
there.
and they're feeling depraved because no one really
he said nobody told us.
On it or whatever.
We went to the best institutions in the world. Nobody said that. That's what they said. We went to some of the best learning institutions. Nobody ever told us how important these books are. And I'm going,
sad
yes,
thing is
it's true.
That they've likely heard that, but not probably in the places they thought were authoritative. That's the one thing I realize as kids growing up, maybe say even in a Christian home or a worshiping home that go to church on Sunday. Maybe it's not honored in their home like it ought to be, but they hear the word. The problem is, who do they see as authoritative? Who do they trust? Who are they listening to? A lot of kids aren't even listening to their own parents. They're definitely not going to go to church and honor that person either, whoever it might be. Who is it they're willing to listen to? Well, a lot of them won't until they get to these colleges where they see now, quote, experts in blah, blah, blah.
Right.
It's sad to me because by that time now, these aren't people they can trust, even though we've elevated them as some sort of experts in some sort of field. Again, I have a hard time with our education system because that's what we've decided to do. We've decided that somebody that has studied this or that angle on something is now an expert and I can trust them. And usually the problem with that is it doesn't stop there. I can trust them in anything now.
Right.
Maybe they know this one subject, but why all of a sudden are they the expert in everything?
Yeah, why would I trust this math major to help me with philosophy?
Exactly. Well, because he's such a great
he will tell you
math
everything
teacher,
is math. And most math majors tell you everything is math.
Well, that's
Even
the
music
kind of
is
thing
math.
that's the kind of thing that's happening in our social media these days. If somebody comes across something maybe even goofy that they like, maybe a comedian or something or a rock star or somebody that's whatever. And now they've seen that, and these people are experts at whatever this is. Well, now all of a sudden they help them make their political decisions. They help them make their, am I supposed to listen to my parents in this? No, by no means. Go over here. All of a sudden, this person's now an expert and influencing their entire lives. It's a sad commentary on how far we've come, and even Tucker would probably agree with us that where's the parents' influence in all this? Where's the grandparents' influence? That's why it's good to hear the rumors we've heard, at least, that the Gen Z kids have tended to come back now to honoring either their grandparents or and looking for those solid truths.
There seems to be a trend in our culture to move to an older wisdom, which is wise to begin with. Something that's stable, that has endured the times. I mean, you just mentioned we saw the Geneva Bible. Well, we saw all kinds of Bibles, and we saw it was a Bible exhibition, and we've been to them before, but this was a pretty solid one. It was pretty awesome, and they had samples and how these books are reliable. One of the arguments that they made is we have maybe 33 copies of Homer's Iliad, yet we accept that it's true. We have thousands of copies of the scripture text, but we don't accept that it's true. We question that. So why is that? And it's because people don't want to believe something to be true. When you have that much more, you have 20 times, 10 times, 20 times the evidence that something's valuable and worthwhile than versus any other ancient text, then what? Why would you question its validity? But because you don't want it to be true. You truly close your eyes and look away from it because you don't want it to be true. And I found myself kind of captured by a thought from Benjamin Franklin today. And I want to share this because Benjamin Franklin would be arguably the least or the most irreligious of our founding fathers. He was a bit of a playboy for his old age. He was a Mennonite in his upbringing, but he lived in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, because it was largely a libertine city. And of course that's where the capital was. But he was a big fan of being in that place where there was a lot more less restrictions of living in a more religious culture. And back in that part of our country, there were very, very religious groups and places where you could go, and they were free to govern how they chose. And so what he said he says, "I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, it is probable that an empire cannot rise without his aid. We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed with his without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. We shall be divided by our partial local interests. Our projects will be confounded, as we ourselves shall become a reproach and a byword down to future ages. And what is worse, mankind may hereafter from this unfortunate instance despair of ever establishing governments by human wisdom, and leave it to chance, war, and conquest. I therefore beg leave to move that henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessings on our deliberations be held in this assembly every morning before we proceed to business, and that one or more of the clergy of this city be requested to officiate in that service, a practice which is evident and true still in our House of Representatives today."
Yeah, interesting that he's one of the
that is the most libertine making the request. And so I think it's interesting to understand that.
It shows, though, that he was brought up understanding that the foundation principles, because he quoted Scripture, the founding principles of Scripture are still the best bedrock for any person, any civilization, any country. There's nothing else out there. There is nothing better. And so to say, especially as an example of that, and we have many, many more quotes from the Founding Fathers, to say that they built this country or wrote the Constitution and all that, completely separate of that, as a completely secular idea from the Enlightenment, doesn't even add up. I mean, too bad we can't interview them. But I'm pretty sure even if they would say, well, maybe, the whole point is that we don't force someone to worship a God they don't believe in, but we definitely set it up on the principles that he set forth, knowing they are the absolute best for everyone, whether one believes yet or not.
Right.
So
And that's the common founding belief of the founders, right? That whether you believe in God or not, it's the best. What was it that we heard earlier? The statement was, "I trust a Christian to have oversight over my liberties and give me the freedom that I desire before I would trust someone who's not." Because a Christian in his foundation values
over someone who doesn't believe.
I would trust a believer over someone who's not.
Unbeliever to set boundaries and rules over a Christian. Yeah, because a Christian, again, based on a life of Jesus who laid his life down for his followers, not demanded of them.
Right.
That's where it breaks down, because people don't know who Jesus is if they don't know at least that about him. That literally most of the Sermon on the Mount was pointed to the downtrodden, the ones who are, quote, marginalized, as is talked about all the time in our government right now, Jesus spoke specifically to them, the orphans, the widows, the caring for the ones who are down. He was not, and that's who he laid his life down for.
Right.
He was not sitting on a throne of power and setting up a bunch of people who were tyrants. That's not what Christians are. That's not who we follow.
No. And it's not that Christians didn't wind up giving bad examples now and again. It happened.
I'm not saying in the name of, again, we said that. Hitler even supposedly imposed the name of Christian when he destroyed Jews. But that obviously does not follow the heritage of Jesus. So the sad state is, like you just said, is the manipulation of words and of wording and of definitions and of vernacular, that has messed things up and has caused confusion. And
the thing is if you're not a believer in God, you're looking for something to control you, because everyone's looking to give some sort of guidance or structure for security, because everybody wants to be safe. So if people don't follow Jesus, just like I said in the Bible, they were calling for a king because they wanted something like men, because they were coming under stress. So they wanted something they could see, and God said, "Fine, if you want this, I'll give you this," and it won't work out for you, and it didn't. But when we look at it in modern society, we look to government. We're going to look to a God. Our God is going to be government, or it's not going to be. It's going to be God himself. And so Christians, throughout things like the pandemic, were one of the greatest resistors of people group that said, we don't think the government's God here. And that the reason Christians could walk through that time in faith is because they had a faith larger than the fear of man during a difficult time in our culture. It was Christian nuns who ministered to the sick and dying during the Black Plague. Yeah. Everyone who was trying to protect themselves fled.
The saddest part...
But the Christians died, risked their lives, because they understood that life was bigger than just this corporal moment that
That's
we live
been
in.
the saddest part of it, is that in our culture, because of our Christian heritage, they can use that stuff against us. They can say, well, the Christian in you or whatever would certainly wear a mask or get a vaccination because that's better for everybody around you. Well, what happens if I don't? What happens if I don't think that's actually best?
Yeah.
And,
Why would I accept your
is that
moral
me?
belief when you're coming from a place that's not right?
Is that me being unkind to someone? Mm-hmm. Or is that me choosing a wisdom that's different than you're telling me it is?
Well, one of our friends, Ben, used to say all the time, he said, "It's unkind for me to accept your faulty premise." That's unkind. It would be kinder for me to tell you the truth than to just capitulate to your fear. And that's what we did in that time frame. But I think that's also what that did, though, is it exposed for our government at large, a little conspiracy theory in me now, exposed to our government at large who the enemies are that they have to go after. And that's why this whole Christian nationalism is coming up, I think, in the debate, is to try and say we've got to alienate these people who resist our control.
Yeah. Besides the fact that they feel threatened by a leader who is standing up, like you said, at least for a lot of the principles that we as Christians have put forth. And he's strong. He's been literally, I heard the other day, a living martyr. And it's true. Trump himself has really been beaten up for a lot of us who would like to stand against, or rather for, freedoms that are real freedoms.
Not just him, Elon Musk.
Well, I'm just
others who have just stood up and said no.
I'm just saying that's where we've been lumped in under this little label or something of some some sort of anti-government thing. And it's that's just not true. We believe in the government that was set up by our founding fathers. We'd like to go back to that, not be added on to a million other specific or supposedly, good for us, whatever, rules, regulations, and you name it. Mm-hmm. But that's what I'm saying. Trump's kind of been a symbol of going against that.
Yeah, and I think it's important.
That's why
Let me
they
say
hate
this.
us.
It's important to understand that because the word you just used matters. For me, is Donald Trump Jesus? No, obviously he's not Jesus. Is he a righteous man? Couldn't tell you. Don't know him. I know he is, but he is a symbol right now.
Yeah.
And I think that where the right, those who are against him want you to think that he is what people are seeing as a Messiah type person. And Christians included. They're saying Christians see him as a Messiah type. It's Trump and
So
Jesus.
silly.
They're hand in hand and vacillating for power and authority. That's not the story for people who are followers or who are going to vote for that man. It is that he is a symbol because what he stands for is a set of beliefs that say power does not belong in the central government. He's just like what Ronald Reagan was when Ronald Reagan said, always be afraid of the man that knocks on your door and says, hi, I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. And that was when Reagan said that on the Carson show, everybody died laughing because it was what good humor is, truth.
Yeah.
And so what we find in our society right now is a battle not between two old men who want to be president. What we find in our society right now is two sets of belief. One says that the government is best handled as close to home as possible, decentralized, which is what our founders did. We created a federalist structure, not a centralized national structure. National had some authority, but most of the authority resided in our states. And that is it's tribal, just not tribal, but it's kind of that.
Regional.
It's regional,
rivers,
yeah. And since that we're trusting that the people who best solve the problems are the ones that are closest to the problems.
Yeah.
And we're finding that battle wear itself out in all sorts of places. And the thing is all the heated conversations are happening on the surface, not really dealing with deeper issues, you know, and there are bigger questions, do you believe that, well, we could get into other things, but we're running a little bit longer now. So we're going to shut this sucker down here and close it up. But if I am not a Christian nationalist. I am a Christian who loves the country that he lives in because the country makes him free. If someone wants to call me a Christian nationalist, I'll lean into that and say, sure, if by that you don't mean racist, white supremacist, control freak.
If I can define it for you.
If I can tell you what that means to me. But when I sit with lunches with somebody and they have as much a different idea of what it is and they think Christian Zionism is Christian nationalism, and I'm sure there's 300 other definitions out there, all that's doing is confusing the thing. So I think we as believers have a responsibility to say, as a Christian in America, an American follower of Christ, you have a responsibility to hold to a set of beliefs and vote according to the party, to the person who sets forth a belief system that's the closest to yours. They can't align up completely because we don't agree on everything.
Right.
But on that which is important, let me just make it real clear for you. Life begins at conception. So anything that takes that away, it's not a matter of a woman's rights. Do women have rights over their own body? Yes, they do, but they don't have rights over the body of the child that's inside of them. Once that life is conceived, it's a life and it has rights. So what party holds to that? That's what I believe as a Christian. That's what I believe the Bible teaches. I believe if anything that has potential to walk and thrive outside the womb is as much worth as it does when it's inside the womb. And second, what?
That the Bible has mandated and commanded us from ancient times and new to be for Israel, to be praying for Jerusalem, to be praying and being a friend of Israel. The Bible says that God would bless those who bless Israel and curse those who cursed it. So that's the second thing, is to be on the side of supporting our allies and who have formed the nation of Israel.
And then I'd add to that religious liberty, which is kind of where this conversation started. Right now, religious liberty is under attack in this country like it's never been before. Half of that is coming from reframing of words, restating of things. This whole cancel culture has come to attack religious liberty like anything else. If I say that the Bible teaches that it's wrong for you to be something, and it's just because of what the Bible says, well, the Bible doesn't say that, or you can't say that. I'm going to say what the Bible says. about it. And so we have the right to speak the truth.
But
We have the right to
and-
even, to not just religious liberty, but the freedom to speak our minds, even if it's foolishness, even if you're saying something absolutely crazy, you have as much right to say it. And the thing that's important is we need to understand that we need to trust that human beings have the ability to have a philosophical discussion about something, reason together, and come to a truth about it together. The people who want power are afraid of that because they don't want us to find out what we already know as Christians. People have mental capacity to reason because God gave us brains to think with. And given the right opportunity to have a reasoned conversation with other believers, when Jesus walked amongst earth, guess what? All the people that were fooled or running under the oppression of religious people, in this case, it was religious people, and government people, found themselves sitting across from Jesus having conversations and going, oh, that makes sense. I hadn't thought of it. They could think for themselves. He was saying things they already kind of instinctively understood to be true because of the way that God had made them. And so we have to fight for the right to continue to speak the freedom. Is there anything else? There's like everything else to say that. So whichever party believes that you can say what you want, doesn't want to cancel you. And then, so those are 3 principles. We could give more, but we'll probably do that between now and the election.
We should be allowed to love God and then to love others. And that loving another neighbor as ourselves is from I think it's something that should be innate in us, not dictated to us.
We could get into the whole idea of praying in public. We should be allowed to pray in public. Pray wherever we want to. That's part of our expression of our religious freedom. There's nothing can restrict that. And we're told we can't do that in certain places right now. And people have been arrested for it. So there's a lot of things that we need to be mindful of, but I want to just say it one more time. When it comes to choosing anyone at any place up and down the ballot, when it comes to you walking into a voting booth, number one, don't forfeit your right to vote because you don't like a personality. That's just crazy.
Yeah.
Go in and check the box of the people who are on the side that believe the things that you believe as a Christian. They're not perfect. There's never been one that's perfect. People said the same nasty things about previous presidents and president-elects and former, and candidates that they say about these. Nothing has changed. History is consistent in that. It's accelerated from generation to generation, and it gets worse and worse because every country goes through this kind of decline. We have an opportunity to turn it around or just let it slide. And I, for one, am not willing to let it slide. How about you?
Yeah, I'd really like to pray that God rescues us, and if he can't, then Jesus, we're ready for you to come back and collect your people. We're good with that.
I agree. There was a quote, one more I was going to read to kind of close this out with today. Okay. And this is really straightforward because William Penn said it, and he said, "It is impossible that any people of government should ever prosper where man render not unto God that which belongs to God, as well as to Caesar, which belongs to Caesar." So there you go.
There you go.
Figure out how to understand that these things can live together in concert. With that being said, God bless you guys, and we'll see you next time.